Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a high-stakes maritime crisis that is literally unfolding right now. We're going to decode a modern phenomenon where a totally clandestine armada is, well, systematically defeating the world's most powerful navies. It's a massive story about global economics, incredibly advanced evasion tactics, and a truly immense environmental risk. Let's get right into it.
Here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the 2026 Hormuz blockade, then look at the anatomy of these ghost fleets, and dive into their shadowy tactics. After that, we'll cover the geopolitical energy nexus, the ticking environmental bomb they create, and wrap up with the bypassed maritime order.
All right, Part 1, the 2026 Hormuz blockade, the inciting incident.
So our story kicks off with the collapse of the Islamabad peace talks, which triggered a really rapid escalation back in April of 2026. The United States sent in over 10,000 personnel, dozens of warships, and aircraft to enforce a strict, impartial blockade. The main goal here? A severe physical strangulation of one of the world's most vital maritime choke points. This was intended to cost the Iranian treasury a whopping $500 million a day. Naturally, legitimate daily shipping transits absolutely plummeted as commercial operators just fled the area. But notice that April 20th detail? Within days, intelligence reported that 26 ships had somehow successfully bypassed this incredibly formidable blockade. You have to ask yourself, how is that even possible?
Which brings us perfectly to Part 2, Anatomy of Ghost Fleets, the antagonist of our story.
Well, instead of just throwing in the towel and capitulating to the physical blockade, targeted nations leaned super heavily into a parallel shipping ecosystem. And we aren't talking about some small, fringe back alley operation here. Today, this shadow ecosystem controls a shocking 48% of the world's large commercial oil tankers. Let that sink in, almost half the entire global fleet. These are not your standard commercial vessels. They're what we call shadow tankers, a massive fleet specifically designed, literally from the keel up, to completely mask their location, their true ownership, and the origin of their cargo. If you compare legitimate shipping to this shadow ecosystem side by side, the staggering lack of structural oversight becomes, honestly, quite terrifying. Think about it. Legitimate ships carry what are known as blue cards for international insurance, and they average about 13 to 14 years of age. The dark fleet, on the other hand, they operate with totally opaque registries, fake or sanctioned insurance, and they push their vessels way past their normal expiration dates. We're talking 15 to over 30 years old.
Just take a look at the extreme risk vessels that are in active operation right now. You've got ships like the Ahriman 114, which is 29 years old and officially categorized as an extreme structural risk. Collectively, the high-risk vessels in just this Iranian shadow fleet carry a capacity of around 28 million barrels of crude oil. To put that massive volume into perspective, imagine an ecological disaster 25 times worse than the Exxon Valdez, just floating out there right now.
The absolute kicker here is the sheer age of these ships. Take the Nasha, for example. It was repurposed for floating storage out of sheer desperation by the Iranian resistance economy, and it is over 30 years old. When a tanker hits that age, the risk of a catastrophic hull fatigue, a cargo pumping failure, or the propulsion just giving out is astronomically high. Moving right along to Part 3, Tactics in the Shadows, the art of evasion. Okay, so let's dive into this fascinating, high-speed cat-and-mouse game. How exactly do you hide a 300,000-ton ship from the U.S. Navy? Well, one primary method is called AIS spoofing. By manipulating their automatic identification systems, or, simply going dark, these tankers create incredibly sophisticated digital illusions. For example, during the height of the blockade, tankers were actively transmitting GPS coordinates that showed them safely anchored off Basra, Iraq. But at the exact same time, satellite imagery proved those identical ships were actually physically loading crude oil at Iranian terminals. It's like a giant digital magic trick. So, how does this build into a full, step-by-step evasion strategy? To successfully launder the origin of sanctioned crude, these crews execute a daring three-step maneuver. First, they go completely dark by deactivating that AIS. Second, they utilize territorial routing. This means they physically hug the coastlines, staying strictly within that 12 nautical miles sovereign limit. This is a brilliant, albeit sneaky, move because it politically restricts foreign navies from boarding them without sparking a massive international incident. And finally, step 3, they execute a semi-dark ship-to-ship transfer way out at sea.
And where do these shadowy transfers actually happen? Well, once they're totally dark, the vessels retreat to remote, poorly monitored maritime hubs. They'll load up at Karg Island, maybe loiter a bit near Chabahar, and then sneak over to regions like the Gulf of Oman or deep water zones roughly 70 kilometers off the coast of Malaysia. Out in these blind spots, they secretly swap their cargo over to an entirely different ship, forge some new documentation, and boom, make the oil look completely legitimate. The whole shebang is about obscuring the true source.
Now for part 4, the geopolitical energy nexus, the beneficiaries.
So all of this dangerous tactical evasion, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It's heavily fueled by a massive, closed-loop economic engine that unites a strategic trilateral alignment. Operating largely outside the U.S. financial system, China steps in as the buyer of last resort. They have this vast network of small, independent, teapot refineries that provide essentially bottomless demand. And this demand sustains Iran's internal resistance economy, and it's practically funded an absolute explosion in the size of the shadow fleet. We're talking a jump from just 70 vessels back in 2020 to nearly 550 by 2025. That is a staggering rate of growth.
And this leads us to the wild geopolitical irony of the whole situation. The US-led blockade physically bottlenecked the global oil supply at Hormuz. The result of that? Well, global oil prices instantly spiked for everybody. And who benefited? Russia. Their Urals crude, which is normally sold at a pretty heavy discount, shot up to a 13-year high. Actually, if you look at a single month, from February to March 2026, the Kremlin's daily seaborne revenue surged by a mind-blowing 115%. That generated upwards of 150 million extra euros per day, and a huge chunk of that was carried right on the backs of the shadow fleet.
Okay, part 5. A ticking environmental bomb. The threat.
Because while the geopolitical winners and losers are constantly shifting on the world stage, our global oceans are being pushed toward a truly unprecedented ecological catastrophe. Consider this. The estimated cleanup cost for just a single mid-sized Aframax-class spill, it can hit $1.6 billion, billion with a B. And because these decaying old ships don't carry legitimate insurance, there's literally no megacorporation standing by to write that check. So that devastating financial burden, it falls entirely on the local coastal states and their taxpayers.
And guys, this is not just some abstract theory. A February 2026 simulation run out of Germany modeled what would happen if a 48,000-ton shadow tanker failed in the really delicate, semi-enclosed waters of the Persian Gulf. The results were terrifying. We're talking about a toxic slick covering thousands of square miles in just 30 days. It would cause mass marine mortality, severely damage the habitat beyond any short-term repair, and critically threaten the regional desalination infrastructure. That's the very infrastructure providing clean drinking water to millions of people in the area.
What happens when the whole operation becomes too hot or just too unprofitable? The operators frequently just pack up and walk away. Just look at the 2025 vessel abandonment crisis. They leave these rusting zombie ships totally abandoned, often still fully loaded with crude oil. A massive 82% of these abandonments hide behind flags of convenience. These are obscure registries that perfectly shield the true corporate owners, leaving literally millions of barrels of drifting, hazardous cargo completely unmonitored. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
Finally, Part 6, the bypassed maritime order, the new rules of the sea.
We are currently witnessing the permanent bifurcation of the entire global shipping industry. Physical naval containment is basically proving to be a Herculean, perhaps impossible task. The shadow fleet is always adapting. Historically, yeah, they hid behind those obscure open registries. But as Western sanctions successfully pressured those smaller countries to deregister the ships, the fleet just pivoted. Now they are reflagging directly to Russia and Iran. This is a huge deal because it creates a powerful sovereign shield. Suddenly, boarding a rusting 30-year-old tanker isn't just an inspection. It's treated as a violation of freedom of navigation and potentially an outright act of war.
So, navies are essentially being forced to rewrite their playbooks and innovate. To counter this new sovereign shielding, operations like NATO's Task Force X in the Baltic Sea are moving completely away from traditional physical blockades. Instead, they're pivoting to this high-tech networked ocean approach. They are integrating uncrewed underwater vehicles, UUVs, and utilizing AI-driven real-time acoustic anomaly detection. The goal now is to intercept and quietly escort these suspicious vessels away from critical infrastructure autonomously. They have to prevent the disasters before they happen, rather than relying on dangerous old-school board and search tactics against these ghost fleets.
The 2026 blockade really proved one thing for sure. These clandestine networks are unbelievably resilient.
This silent, aging armada just continues to adapt, slipping deeper into the shadows and pulling tighter under sovereign protection. Which leaves us with one incredibly massive, lingering question. Is this dark ecosystem just a temporary symptom of modern statecraft and sanctions? Or has the Shadow Fleet fundamentally and permanently rewritten the laws of the global ocean?
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.